I want to start after the Gabon report that we were playing there. I just want to gauge your view on the philosophy, really. Is it the responsibility of richer nations to be helping developing nations with their climate change goals? Magid, what do you think?
100% yes, and I'll explain. It's firstly important to recognise that the climate crisis is hugely unjust. Like throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, countries like the UK and those in the global north were and still are some of the world's biggest emitters of carbon pollution, and as a direct result have become some of the world's wealthiest nations. And let's be frank, it's largely happened at the expense of developing countries such as Gabon in the global south. And as a result of issues like colonial and post-colonial relations, so countries like the UK and other kind of more advanced countries and in Europe have got a moral obligation to compensate those countries and communities that are negatively impacted by climate change due to our, let's be honest, our collective failure to tackle reasonable steps to limit our emissions in the past as well as today. Because it's going to take a global approach to it rather than just individual approaches.
So a big yes from you, Magid. What about you, Ziya?
Well, I have to agree with Magid there. I know that rich countries are disproportionately responsible for climate emissions and that poor countries are disproportionately impacted by climate change. And so obviously there's a debt to be paid from rich countries to poor countries, but there's a way of going about that. There's good models and bad models. Morocco and what's happening with the Green Climate Fund is an example of a good model. Perhaps we can talk about that. But one thing that I want to point out, if you consider something like losing weight as an analogy for lowering emissions, right now what the rich countries are saying is, hey, we want to eat all the ice cream and we want the poor countries to do all the diet and exercise. It's all going to balance out on the books. But the question is, you have to say, A, is this fair? B, even if those poorer countries get fit, they can't continue on that treadmill if the emissions continue to rise. Fundamentally, what needs to happen is that the rich countries have to lower their emissions and their resource use if you want to see that real change. They have to stop eating that proverbial ice cream.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, and I just want to bring in this quote here because this really speaks to the issue, doesn't it? Here we go. And really, when you've got the richer nations enjoying the economic growth that has come as a consequence of damaging the planet, and then they're expecting developing countries to do their bit. I mean, we're talking about a lift there for African nations. What does that lift look like? Magid, what do you think?
Well, we need to unlock funds and resources to developing countries that are affected by years and legacies of extraction and exploitation. And I think a really good first step and an essential one towards repairing this, as well as historic injustices and saving our planet, is for countries in the global north who are, and I'll keep repeating it, responsible for this crisis, is to immediately engage in a wide-ranging program of debt cancellation towards developing countries, so as to at least break one link in that long history of extractive exploitation. And the COP26 really gives us a great opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and Ziya, what do you think? Magid proposing their debt cancellation, does that work?
Well, I think that there's ways that you can work with local countries so that you're not imposing your ideas on another sovereign nation and making them develop like the old 1980s development models. What I like about what Morocco and the Green Climate Fund, what they're doing right now, if I could share with you for an instance, in Morocco, they have argan trees, and these argan trees have been harvested for millennia. They produce the nuts that make the oil for my hair, but it's also a great food source. The forests there are a buffer for desertification for the Sahara Desert. So right now, those forests are suffering from over-harvesting and climate change. But what the fund is doing is they are building tens of thousands of hectares of argan of orchards. And so what that's going to do is that's going to be an extra buffer for desertification. It protects the natural forests. And also it's going to be a sequestering device, 500,000 tons of additional carbon being sequestered by the trees. But best of all, it helps the local economies and the women in particular who have cooperatives who've been doing this traditional way of life with harvesting the nuts and producing oil. As an end effect, I get some argan oil for my shampoo. But fundamentally, what we have to do when we do this sort of transfer of wealth is we have to consult with local countries and we have to do things that are to their benefit first.